Hello, and welcome to Conversations with We. My name is Rosalind Chapman. I am a We board member and founder, CEO of the Chapman Edge, a sales consulting company. The We community is comprised of women leaders from the consumer packaged goods industry and includes suppliers, retailers, their supporting ecosystem. Our goal is to expand women's voices and roles in the industry. We create environments that promote networking, mentoring, fostering relationships. As a collective, we also give back to communities we serve through annual charity initiatives. Having We as a resource during COVID has been amazing. This is the second in our series of discussions with industry leaders about championing representation and providing mentorship and support for African American women, our greater community at large, and all women and men who want to stand as advocates for racial justice and equity. That is what our panel will discuss today. Let me tell you how things will work for the next hour. This event is meant to be engaging. We want to hear from you. Please use the chat icon to ask questions. During the final 15 minutes, we will get to as many as we can. Whether you're watching today alone, at your computer, or office with teams, we want to hear from you. Please post your photos on our LinkedIn page. We Empowering Women to Advance Wellness, forwe.org. As we move into the conversation, I ask that you take a moment to think about advocates in your career journey. When I left corporate America and started my business, I wasn't sure where my relationships would sift out. I was crossing the bridge from being a multinational company executive to being a sole proprietor. All of us have advocate stories. A Rite Aid executive, white woman, that I had worked with during my corporate tenure arranged for me to have a consulting contract with their chain, assisting with category management. This was one of my first contracts. I was so excited. Then enters white man from my corporate days, who also had a contract with Rite Aid. He did not want me as a Black woman to have that role. He called Rite Aid white woman and told her to fire me. I was told there was racial language used in the conversation. White woman told him she resented his call and thought his attempt to affect a small business was disgusting. She further recommended to Rite Aid management that his firm be fired. Management complied. 20 years it's been. I continue to have advocates who step up for me. It takes the 4 C's: courage, confidence, compassion, and conscience. This woman executive at Rite Aid had all 4 C's. That's what we're going to talk about today. I am honored to introduce my fellow We board member and longtime friend, Wendy Liebmann, founder, CEO, WSL Retail. Wendy founded WSL, a global consultancy that helps clients anticipate and activate change through innovative shopper-led retail strategies. She is recognized as an innovator of shopper insights, an in-demand noted speaker, addressing business and educational organizations around the world. She sits on the board of directors of many national organizations and our own We. Listeners, we are in for a treat. We are so fortunate to have her moderate the second in our panel series of 4. The topic today, how to be an advocate. I turn the conversation over to you, Wendy.
Thank you, Roz, and thank you for that extraordinary story that you told. That is one of the most powerful stories I have heard as it relates to advocacy. and it tells us it's been a long road and it will continue to be a long road, but we are all in this together, and that's what's so important today. So thank you very much for joining us on this journey. As Ros says, this is the second in our series of moving forward. How do we together move forward to help issues of development, social justice, and ensure our companies, our people, our organizations are stronger for all of that, which we know they will be. So let me begin by giving you a few of the details. Ros told you how the speakers, how the questions would work. I think she told you to post in the chat. You can also post in the Q&A. You know, we'll find you wherever you are. Ros is keeping a close eye on that, so thank you for that. One of the things we will be doing today is we will be recording this, of course. It will go again up on the WE website, and Ros will tell you that long, whatever I can never quite remember it, but she'll tell you at the end, so don't worry about that. We do want you to be engaged. That would be terrific. Technological challenges. We all live and breathe these, right? We know what happens. Sometimes a child, a dog, a cat, a partner, or somebody, a phone rings. This will probably all happen in my space here, so I apologize for that, but please do not panic. We will resolve all of that as we go, which will be terrific. So that's sort of just the ground rules. And let me begin by saying thank you very much for our panelists today. We have an extraordinary panel, and I appreciate their time and effort and contribution in advance. Let me introduce them all to you. I will do it in alphabetical order by their first names. They can all turn on their cameras and unmute themselves. Cara Sylvester is the Senior Vice President of Home for Target. Hi, Cara.
Hi, everyone.
She has been with, actually everybody on the panel I think has been with their companies for about 20 years, so they have a really solid experience of living and breathing in corporate America, which is terrific. And Cara is very involved in the company's diversity and inclusion strategies and organization, and she will share a lot about that as we go through the discussion today. C with an H, Chris Skyers. Welcome, Chris.
Hi, everyone.
Thank you. Good to have you here. Chris is the Vice President of Own Brands at the Wakefern organization. He too has been there for about 20 some odd years, as I recall. I feel like I've known him that long. And Chris has an interesting background as well, because he, as I remember, came out of HR and development and things like that. So even though he's in a merchandising function and has moved through all of that, like Cara has done strategy and merchandising. We're going to hear all sides of this conversation today, which will be terrific. And last but not least, Maisha Webster, who is hello Maisha, who is the Vice President of Sales for Procter & Gamble, and she runs the Walgreens business out of Chicago. So we have 1, 2 from the middle of the country, the other 2 of us from the East Coast. We're doing well. We have lots of diversity here, location, gender, color of skin, all of those things. We have hair color, all of that we've got going on today, which is wonderful. So I appreciate that. And Maisha also has an interesting background working for Procter & Gamble globally for a number of years. So she has seen sort of a global view to this broader story, and is also, like everyone else, very engaged in diversity and development within the Procter & Gamble Corporation. So I thank you all for being here today. You know, I just want to begin this by, in our first panel, which was really talking about how do we even consider what questions we should be asking in development of talent. One of our panelists then, Kathleen Wilson-Thompson from the Walgreens Boots Alliance, who runs global HR for them, talked about, you know, sometimes we think about ticking boxes. You know, we do she talked about the EOC, legal, tick, tick, tick. We meet all those requirements within our companies. But she said that's not enough. She said that's not enough just to tick the boxes anymore. We really have to understand it's a much deeper, systemic discussion that we have beyond the legal issues that we have to deal with. It's much deeper, more emotional conversation that we have to build, and strategies and support we have to build within our organization. And that sort of got us to where we are in this conversation today, the discussion around advocacy. So just by way of a teeny inside the tent, when we discussed this as a community, as a we board community, we talked about how to be an ally. And then we realized, as a result of Kathleen's comment and some other discussions, that actually ally wasn't enough, that we really needed to talk about advocacy. So I thought I'd begin at the beginning and ask the question to you all. Maybe Maisha, you want to begin? What does advocacy really mean to you when you think about that as an individual and within a corporation?
Thank you, Wendy, for that question. It's a great question. There are several terms out there that kind of get convoluted. This idea of a mentor or an ally or a champion. We like to be very creative with our language. And I'll just talk you through my perspective on how I see the difference. Mentor, all of us, regardless of our success level in our respective careers, have had mentors who have provided us coaching to deal with the context that we're currently in. And then that ally is someone who's willing to stand beside you and partner with you either on an issue or a topic, but really stand in that issue with you. And an advocate is really the highest bar as I see it, because it's really about actioning, publicly speaking out, advancing someone else to where you are. Advocacy has probably the highest risk level because you have to offer your privilege to someone else in order to give them access, advancement, development, whatever that case may be. So I love to use the terminology of advocacy because it has the highest level of accountability to drive action and the highest level of accountability from an education standpoint, because you can't advocate for something that you don't thoroughly understand.
Mm-hmm.
My perspective on the topic.
Yeah, and that notion of education, of informing ourselves, whoever we are, to advocate becomes so important, right? In all of that.
Absolutely. Sometimes I hear people talk about, well, or they have a badge or a symbol, something on their keychain or their phone that says, I'm an advocate for this issue. And I love when I see that, because that means they're stepping out. They're allowing everyone to see the issue that they're standing up for. And what that really means is they're willing to raise the bar as well and personally put time and energy and engagement to really understand the core of the issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's why I think it's so different from the mentor-mentee relationship, which is this, call it touch point, where someone is articulating a problem or a challenge and I'm giving them some coaching or perspective. I'm not really getting into that issue with them on an ongoing basis. I'm just giving some coaching and counseling.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not necessarily taking the responsibility to change that situation systemically. Mm-hmm. When I call myself an advocate, I'm taking full responsibility.
Mm-hmm. Cara, I see you nodding, leaning in, the beauty of Zoom, right?
I'm like, yes, yes, yes. So we use a target, similar word, but we use sponsorship as really it's a word we use rather than advocacy. I agree with Maisha, there's so many terms out there, and I do think it's important that we start here because it's very, very different. Mentorship is something we all have, and I don't want to say it's easy to be a good mentor, but it's kind of easy. It's easy for any of us as leaders to give good career advice. Somebody comes to you with a problem or a development opportunity that they're working on, you give them advice, you help them through it. That is really, really different than advocacy or sponsorship, where you are taking an active role in someone's career. One thing that I've been facing recently relative to this is, as a sponsor, it's making sure that my sponsees set bold enough ambitions for themselves in their careers, especially when they look up and our Black talent does not see nearly enough people that look like them in our senior leadership ranks. And so as a sponsor, I'm actually helping them see the potential, but then I'm actually taking action and putting my own personal reputation on the line in order to help them get there. And that is very different. It is very personal. I think it's a lot harder to be a good sponsor than it is to be a good mentor, but it's something as leaders right now we really need to be taking a good look at and challenging ourselves personally of how do we do that.
And Chris, you had said to me the other day when we chatted that, you know, this is not a part-time thing, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, I agree with both Cara and Maisha. When I think about being an advocate, I reflect on myself and my journey, right? So today I would consider myself a really good mentor to a lot of African Americans in my organization. But was I truly an advocate? And Maisha was right. It does take bold steps. And being an African American brings its own set of complexity with being an advocate, because everyone is reaching for success, and to now stop and take on a greater role, a greater responsibility, not just for yourself and your career growth, but for African Americans and African American women. I think that's something that I missed, right? I thought, you know, being a mentor was enough and being an advisor was enough. But recently in my organization, and again, with all of what we've seen in our communities in the recent months, has forced me to rethink that, am I doing enough? And I have since gone back to my organization as a leader and demanded change from an advocacy level to say, no, we are the largest employer in the state of New Jersey. Why is it that we do not have a D&I leader in the organization as the largest organization? I demand that. Second, we are not actively involved in HBCUs. I demand that we become actively involved in that. So it's not just directly growing someone, but it's now championing a cause that I think is different. And I think for me, this is putting myself out there, but I could tell you, it just has given me a new sense of responsibility in that change.
Mm-hmm. And you alluded to, you know, sort of the recent events, and I think, Cara, you were in the middle of that, right, in Minneapolis, and when George Floyd was killed, and that began the kind of protest movement. How did that change the way Target, who's been very engaged in diversity and inclusion, right? How did that change the way the corporation was thinking? Were there things like Chris is talking about that you had to rethink?
Yeah, we have had pretty bold diversity and inclusion goals that we set several years ago, and we have been making really good progress. Actually, last year, so this is prior to George Floyd, we dissected our data quite deeply and saw that we were not making the same progress with our Black team members as we are other team members of color. They were lagging other groups in terms of representation at the leadership level, turnover, and experience. And we realized that we needed to put additional emphasis specifically on how we're going to make progress against our Black team members. So that work started last year. What I will tell you is that it has accelerated since May and since the murder of George Floyd. We have responded quickly, but we've additionally, in addition to our D&I efforts, we've created a Racial Equity Action and Change Committee, our REACH committee, which is committed to us using our size and scale to drive systemic change for Black Americans, period. And so this is an additional body of work. There's 4 pillars to the work relative to our team member, and that's really, again, advancing some of those goals that we set in place specifically for our Black team members, but it also expands to our guests, our communities, as well as civil engagement and public policy. And so we have come out and said we absolutely will not stand for racism. Black Lives Matter, and we are going to use our size and scale to drive positive change. And so while we've been making progress in this space, I would say we are being much more vocal, and we are being more of advocates and actually taking action than we have in the past.
And how does that, I think about Maisha in the Procter & Gamble, my knowledge of Procter & Gamble and inclusiveness in so many of the initiatives. How did that change, or was it again in place and you had to just think differently, maybe?
Yeah, it's a great question, because to some extent, similar to Cara's comments, we were already on a journey, okay? And then there became a period of time that the country, I think, context changed, and we had to ensure that our vision actually got even bolder. So we were heading in the right direction. We had already started, you probably have seen our decision and choice to start to use our media to speak more to messages of equity, both for women and a broader diversity message around equity. But I think what you're starting to see both with our media, our brands, and choices that we're making inside of the company, and even bolder, raising the bar, so to speak. It is no longer acceptable to have anyone stand on the sidelines. Equity and inclusion is not an opt-in choice anymore. I could probably make that comment for us as Americans, but definitely as we look at our company.
Can you explain that a little bit more, what it's not an opt-in
Sure.
anymore? What have you done, or what is Procter & Gamble doing that has changed that for people?
Absolutely. So even things from, call it doubling down on our efforts to train managers on how to manage diversity, making decisions and choices. Chris spoke to recruiting, right? Where you recruit from to some extent drives some of the pool and the choice and the slates that you see kind of coming into the company. Making sure not only that we are recruiting from a broad, diverse number of schools, but also who is on the team to make those decisions on who kind of gets past that first interview, making sure those are equally as diverse. It's about rooting out bias. It's not about assuming that any system works as it should. And the great thing is we have found broad scale the leaders in P&G willing to take that next level to say whatever we have been doing is good, but how do we make it great? And so both inside the company and externally, everything from making the choice to give all of our employees a day off to get engaged. Because engagement in making your community better, again, we don't want folks to stand on the sideline. If you want to use that day to march, if you want to use that day to help a charity, we are now investing in our employees to do that. Those are just some of the examples. It has to come together in a cohesive program, but I would summarize it in institutionalizing equity.
It's interesting because, Chris, I also think about when I walk into you have a diverse range of stores, right? And I think about the store when you opened it in Newark, right? So that was part of a community, underserved. You built this terrific new store there, and with a lot of African-American shoppers, African-Americans who worked in the store. And I think about that, you know, as it being both you and Cara retailers, and that vertical, horizontal ability to influence change. Can you talk a little bit about that from the store level to the management level?
Yeah, you know, thank you for that, Wendy. And that store, I still communicate very often with Neil Greenstein, who's the owner of that store. Even during some of the protests that was going on, he and I had a really intimate conversation about the actions he should take based on potentially his store being impacted by some of the folks that were rioting. And actually what I said to him was, I said, Neil, there's nothing you could do. You did it 6 months ago. You did it 2 years ago when you decided to build a world-class store in a food desert. And that community is going to be with you. It's not about calling the cops at this time. It's really about what you've done over the last 2 years. And sure enough, he took that advice. He had a team meeting with his staff, and his store was untouched, because I think the community realized that there you had a caring owner within that community, and that was their store. It was the community store. And why would we want to destroy a community store? And it's all the things that he's done prior to that. But I say all that to say, we do have to do more as a whole. We have over 70,000 employees, and I think our purpose of caring deeply about people, we thought that was enough. You know, that should cover everything. The communities in which we serve, our employees. And what we've realized over time, by not having a solid commitment to diversity and inclusion, things just happen, right? You wake up one day and I'm the only African-American executive in my company. And they're like, well, but we're doing everything. We of course we care. Look at our purpose statement. And it really is about chronicling your actions. What actions are you going to put in place to ensure that there's focus in these areas? And I think that's what the recent months have really shined a light on within my organization, that it's more than just saying you care, but it's the action that's there. We do care. The question is, how do we keep ourselves honest going forward? And I think that you're going to see more and more of that, especially in small businesses as we go forward.
Cara, some of the things you've been doing too.
It really resonates with me. A couple different things that you guys said. One is diversity and inclusion is not optional. And we really have examined the way we've talked about it. And we historically would have used words on like where you're at on your diversity and inclusion journey and things like that. No, like we've had diversity and inclusion goals and we have met a lot of those goals. We have not met all of them. And so we are ensuring that every team member understands that it's not optional. And we're going as far as putting additional measures in place with our leaders in terms of accountability. We're treating our diversity and inclusion goals just like we would a business goal. If you're not meeting one of your business goals, there's going to be consequences. If you're not meeting one of your diversity and inclusion goals, there's going to be consequences for pieces of that. But as I think about the word action and what's changed over the last 6 months, it's really making sure that, again, every area of Target understands the role that they contribute. So thinking through us rebuilding our Lake Street store, which is the store that was right in the middle of the protests after George Floyd. We historically we always work with the community when we build stores, but it is so much deeper now. It started with our contractor. So we specifically chose a diverse contractor who's local in the community to actually be the lead person. We are co-creating and we're listening more than we ever have with the community. We're actually changing the design of the stores in order to create more equitable experiences for the community and what they need around it. So, and to hear our teams come back with the pride of how they're doing things differently, feels really, really good in terms of the step changes that we all need to make moving forward.
You also, as I understand through Target, I mean, every group, every area in the company, you're in charge of merchandising in this function, right? But you've sort of segmented the company to make sure this is organized that way. So can you talk a little bit about that too? And then Maisha and Chris jump in and talk about some of the things you see there.
Yeah, absolutely. We all have our diversity and inclusion goals are going to be across total Target. And then each area plays a little bit of a different role. And so while we have goals on representation as well as turnover, et cetera, specifically within merchandising, we play a huge role in terms of the product assortment that we carry and making sure that we've got the right merchandise for all guests. And so that comes to supporting more diverse businesses, the suppliers that we're choosing to work with. We're having lots of conversations around the design community right now. I lead our home merchandising area, which plays a really big role in terms of our style-based businesses. And so we're having different conversations around the inequities that exist in the design community for both home and apparel designers. And so we're having a different conversation to say we can change that and we can play a role as Target to actually create more equitable experiences, starting with internships or who we actually hire to actually help cultivate that design talent. So you'll see us taking a lot of steps forward in terms of our support of Black-owned businesses, our supplier base, as well as our designer base, which would be more of a specific goal relative to merchandising. Our supply chain area has different goals and specific to their area, our real estate and properties team, again, as they think about their contractors they choose, et cetera. So there's a little bit of tailored depending on what area of the organization you're in.
Mm-hmm.
Just to add to what Cara said, I think, you know, when you think about ShopRights and the fact that we're cooperative and we're owned by 50 different individual families, our stores are true reflections of our community. So we've never, there were some things years ago when I was in health and beauty where we had to reimagine the beauty aisle to ensure that we were speaking to the right audience in terms of African Americans that would shop beauty because we had it segregated. So we've worked closely to truly integrate that beauty space and make it as elevated for all of our consumers. But for the most part, our stores are a reflection of the community because of our owners and the operators that are in the store every day to ensure that they're meeting the customer needs. I think the work that's being done now is really at the corporate level to ensure that our employee base reflects our community and is able to advocate on behalf of our community as well. So that is the major change, and that's going to be driven with data and driven with a team. And I think that's where we're going to see, over the next year or so, where we're early in the journey, where most organizations have a well-established process in place for D&I. We're early in that journey, but I strongly believe that the past 6 months has really elevated our organization to take action. So I'm looking forward to see what the next 6 months will bring. I will be an active participant in that change versus sitting on the sidelines.
And not the only one, right?
Yeah, no, I'll bring everyone along with me if I have to.
Yes, I have no doubt about that. I think about that too, Maisha, from your point of view. So there you are as a vendor, a very large global vendor, and you can influence in many, many ways. How do you see the power of advocacy in all the areas that Procter & Gamble touches, including retailers? They won't listen, it's all right.
No, we have great relationships. I'll talk a little bit of a different angle because I think Karen and Chris did a great job talking about, call it the retail environment and call it assortment choices that can be made. The angle I'll talk a little bit about is this idea of social distance, and I don't mean social distance in the COVID world of it all, the 6 feet of it. I mean it from a social distance in that we're really working to break down the fact that many of our employees don't have diverse social networks. Mm-hmm. And what that causes is a distance and a disconnect to really be able to advocate and understand holistically what are some of the implications of a lack of equity. And so we've taken on some significant work. It's being called in the industry uncomfortable conversations. For me, I think they are comfortable and necessary conversations to happen in, call it, diverse circles of employees who are like-minded in the business to really share their unique perspective with one another. And we've been taking significant time to do that over the past 4 or 5 months. And it's because it's the foundation of advocacy. We find that advocacy really ignites when people feel like they know the individual. Mm-hmm. They know what they're advocating for, they know what they're trying to change. And so having these conversations, both inside of our company, also in industry events, really helps, call it, bridge that social distance gap where people say, you know what, I'm hearing this issue for the first time in a different way. And maybe that's going to cause me to do something different than I've ever done before. Not just because of what I've seen on the media, because we all know that the media can be kind of one direction nowadays, but because I have spoken to someone who I have a significant amount of respect for in the business, and therefore I can hear the perspective in a way that I never have before. So I just shared that with you, Wendy, as another piece of work on top of what my other 2 colleagues articulated that has been really powerful and what I would call the first step of the advocacy journal.
So does that mean, I'm just thinking about the first panel discussion we did, does that mean the onus becomes you, Chris, the Black community, to educate the people in your companies? Or, I asked that question in our first panel and I said, what is it that we don't get? Why am I in the room? And one of our panelists very kindly said, one, we need you in the room, because if you're not in the room, this is not getting done. And secondly, but she also said, we can't educate everybody. You've got to be willing to educate yourself. So I'm thinking about, are we pushing more onto you, our, Black community members here?
I see those conversations as, call it a 2-way street. So I don't see it as any one particular person taking on the burden of the conversation. What I have seen when I participated in these discussions is I think everyone hears a little bit differently, different perspectives, because there is no two sides of the issue. There are 100 sides of the issue of equity. And so for people to be able to hear from one of their colleagues, their view on equity inside and outside of the company, and again, in the industry, I think is an enabler for people to open their mind, get more engaged, and in other words, collapse the social distance. Meaning people can look different and think the same. People can look the same and think differently. And really understanding where those points of connections are.
Okay. And Chris, I saw you.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree 100%. I always, you know, I've been privileged to be a part of women advocacy groups, and I can tell you I'm biased, so I've been drinking the Kool-Aid forever. So I find I learn so much from strong women, right? So hearing Maisha say that is exactly where I align with her 100%. I do think that it is not a one-way street. I think what I always say to my colleagues is, and I have these conversations often, you know, I have conversations about me walking into the leadership room and being the only African-American in that room. And I try to I always say the reverse. Imagine if you worked for, I always say Puffy, and we're in an all black boardroom and you're the only person that walks in. Tell me how you think you would feel and how you would respond in that scenario. And it does open the conversation. It really is about just having real talk and not being afraid to just say what's on your mind. It's okay. You know, that's, again, it is the basis, the foundation of getting to know each other, because it's true. If you look at the news, depending on which way the protests are going, or if it's a view of riots today, it could shape everyone's view. And you lose sight of the fact that it is about equality. And that's simply all we're asking for. We're not asking, you know, to have, you know, criminals commit violence. We're just saying it's about equality, and sometimes that gets lost in the media. So it really is back to getting to know each other individually, and where we can have groups in-house within organizations that can really nail that. I think it's great. Again, we're early in the journey. You know, that's something that I think I will have our organization aspire to, but certainly where you can have those open and honest discussions, I think will be critical.
Yeah, and Cara, you, as with Maisha, are a long way in this journey, it seems to me. What are the things you've learned that don't work? You know, that you've said, no, that's not working for us. We need to.
I would steer back to the conversation that I talked about. Like, we've had diversity and inclusion goals. We have a number of programs, which I can talk about all day. But when we looked at the data, where have we actually made progress and where haven't we? And that's what everyone's got to do. We specifically had gaps with our Black talent. So then it comes down to asking the deep questions of why and what's going on there. And too often we found that the conversation we were just having around getting to know people and actually talking through deeply, when you actually have the conversation and create the environment to actually have people feel comfortable of what's going on, you get to the root of what's going on. And one of the biggest challenges that we have, specifically within merchandising, is our lack of Black talent at the senior leadership level. So Chris, you talked about being the only Black person in the room from a leadership standpoint. The ripple effect of that on our young Black talent is profound. And so that's been an issue for a couple of years, but we had to look ourselves in the mirror to say, how are we going to change the trajectory? Because that is actually causing our young Black talent to question themselves, their career path. Do they have a home? And, you know, should they stay at Target? And so we're having a whole different set of conversations around, at the senior leader level, around accountability and different recruiting practices and the bias that Maisha talked about, like really looking in the mirror and examining the reasons why we are where we are. to put a different set of strategies in place. We can't just keep doing what we're doing and expect different outcomes. We actually need to have different strategies to change the outcomes.
Mm-hmm. So are there, if I'm getting started, so Chris talked about where his company is on the journey, and Procter & Gamble and obviously Target are at other levels. And we've got an audience here who could be anywhere on this journey, right? From an individual to a company. Are there one or two, three things that we have to, getting started? It seems in some ways it's a huge undertaking, but how do we get started in this?
I mean, I would start, and Maisha, maybe you can jump in here, is by setting measurable goals. So what are your goals and what are you trying to achieve? And I think by us setting goals out about 4 or 5 years ago at Target, that helped crystallize a vision for the entire organization of where we're going. Then we can actually put plans in place to actually achieve those goals. And so I think until you're actually saying where you want to go and what you want to achieve, I think it's a really muddy water. Mm-hmm. I think the second thing I would say is creating the conversations or the ability to have the uncomfortable conversations, and know that especially in this time, especially as we're in a work from home pandemic, you can't expect people to just like put on their happy game face at work when they are struggling in life. And so we are really trying to embrace the humanity in all of this, embracing the individuals, and really opening the door to have conversations where we can get to know people deeply, because that is ultimately, we are all humans kind of living through this. And I think thinking through, people have a home life and then a work life is a really slippery slope in this environment. And so I think for me, it would be goals, but then also, especially as leaders, being able to create environments where people feel comfortable having an open, honest dialogue.
Yeah, I would agree with, I'm sorry if I'm jumping in here. I would agree with what Cara said around goal setting. For us, that's going to be the critical first step. The question is, how do you evolve your culture and to create that environment where it feels safe to have these conversations? I think that is more complex, right? So you can't set a goal to do that. And it is one of those things where you have to continue to have conversation at the very leadership level of the organization to say, what kind of culture do we want to foster for our employees, and to make sure that they're living that, those leaders are living that daily, because change will come from that. But you can set all the goals you want. If you cannot change your culture, the goals will not be realized, because African Americans, women will not want to join an organization that just feels different. And that's going to be that's going to be a critical journey for us as an organization, is to make sure that we have an environment that's inclusive. One of the keys to getting there, and I've said this before, is time. It's hard to find that pool of talent that we're looking for. It's just numbers. The numbers just aren't there. From a percentages, it's going to be very difficult to find qualified African Americans, especially African American females, to start to fill those junior, senior level roles. And often what happens is time gets in the way, in my view, that you have to fill a vacancy. And so no matter what your targets are, you're up against sales and time, and you may have 7 qualified white applicants, and you're waiting for 3 qualified, you're waiting for the qualified Black applicants, and it's just, you're running out of time. And what I would say often is, especially in sales positions where you don't have that luxury, what I'm forcing my organization, and I've done myself, is to say, I'll wait. I'll put processes in place to deal with it, but I'm not moving forward until you bring me qualified applicants. And we're just going to sit here forever. We're going to have open recs forever, because I need to see those positions. I need to see qualified folks in front of me. So that's one of the major change, I would say, is just making sure that your organization can deal with that, the time that it's going to take to implement this.
I was just going to add on to that, Chris, because we have implemented something similar where we said we're not going to actually move forward with interviewing until, you know, we have qualified applicants in the pool. But the other thing we've done is shift the mindset for our leaders to say, you need to be spending your time way before you have an opening on your team developing a pipeline and cultivating talent. And the onus is not on HR and recruiting to find you all the right people. That is part their job, but it's also part your job as a leader to know the talent that's out there, start building relationships, and actually cultivate that pipeline well in advance. And so that is definitely a mindset shift and sort of a tangible strategy that we're putting in place to be able to combat some of the problems, because you're exactly right. An opening comes open, you got to move, you're running a big business, you got to make a decision. And so we're trying to unwind all that to say, how can we combat that?
Is there also an opportunity within, I don't even know how to, I'm not being politically correct, I don't even know how to word the question, that within communities to develop support from, you've got talent in your company who know other talent in the company. Is there an opportunity, is that very grassroots level, or do we really have to be thinking about it from supporting education and educational resources? I mean, how do we build that pool over the long term?
I think for us, it's coming down to looking at the data at every level. So it's different, Wendy, as I would say, and there's different strategies that you need to put in place depending on, is it a more junior level? So I think it starts with examining your organization, examining where you've got gaps, and then putting different strategies in place. So I mentioned, you know, in our design world as an example, there's gaps really across the board. And so we're starting with that sort of junior level talent to say, what would it take to cultivate more diverse talent there? What role can Target play in actually being a leader in that space? There are other areas where we have no challenges, you know, in our younger team members, but you hit that sort of right before middle management. That is when you start seeing a challenge and a gap. We start seeing some turnover. And so we're putting different strategies in place there. And then at the more senior level, that's really just a whole different conversation in terms of how are you actually networking within the industry to actually get to know people and, again, develop relationships well in advance of having openings.
Yeah. And so I'm going to ask, I think we've got a couple minutes left and then we'll go to questions other than mine. You know, is there an individual responsibility? I mean, Chris, you've talked about yours clearly, but at a senior management level, but how can I be an advocate as an individual in a company? How do I, you know, not only put up my hand, but actually get on with it, as Maisha said, much more elegantly than me? Is that a responsibility of the individuals in the company to do more and speak up more?
Yes, I love that question because I've often coached people who have said, I think I want to be on one side of the issue of equity versus the other. And Maisha, give me some perspective on how I get there. And for me, I ask them to think about it just like a business plan, because in most cases, I'm talking about highly accomplished business leaders in the industry. And whenever you have a clear goal and objective, you put resources against it, you design an action plan to accomplish it. And most of the people I know, like you all know, measure themselves against it and hold themselves accountable to get there. And so it's kind of that simple. If you consider it a business imperative or a personal imperative, to really elevate your own, what I would say, leadership in the area of equity and inclusion, then design the plan. I have a 9-point plan of where I'm going to invest my time, my energy. It's in 3 buckets. What am I going to do for individuals? What am I going to do for my community? And what am I going to do in my company? It's not that hard because everyone on this phone does it for their own business every day. And I have 3 strategies under each area, and I hold myself accountable. I measure against it. I have a couple of coaches in the areas of specific areas where I need help to grow. But it won't happen through osmosis. Forgive me if you hear some background noise.
I was going to say, are you near the airport? That's a rare noise, right? That's funny for all of us. It was like, oh, we're late for our flight.
Some good construction in my house. But So I say that to everyone, put the same level of energy as you do against your business. And then what I think it produces is results that require you not to have to wait for anything, because it's already designed and set up to win, to serve the business need that you're trying to accomplish.
That's very helpful. Well, I know we could have talked about this forever, and there are some questions, so I feel very greedy if I just keep hogging you for the moment. So what I'm going to do is say my thank you for having you join me today and having you join we today, because it's been very powerful. And if I think about people who, as Roz said, have courage, it's about courage, confidence, compassion, and conscience. It sounds like we have the three of you in the room that can help on that one today. So I thank you for that. I am going to hand the phone back over to the video back over to Roz, who will ask you a few questions from our audience, which would be great. And again, on my behalf and we's, thank you for joining us today. Roz, back to you.
All right, what a moving discussion. Thank you all so much. I could have listened to you longer, but we do have a few questions. The first one here is for Chris. When is it okay to be open? And then when should you listen? And how should one understand the difference?
Well, I think you should always start off with listening, right? So something that I work on every day, because listening kind of gives you the direction of where you need to go next. And I would say it depends on the situation. If you hear a closed-minded conversation taking place, you need to be open. And I think that is something that, you know, again, I go back to personally, that's a huge risk for myself as I grow within the organization, but I think it's one that's necessary. I think you have to have that level of comfortness. And again, it's that all-in attitude. If you're thinking about it, you're not exactly sure that you want to take a certain position on equity, then I think you need to think about it again. But if you feel that this is something that you're passionate about, then go ahead and say it. You know, lean in, because it is a risk. But I think you can't be half in. You have to be all the way in today's world. And again, it's not just about mentoring. It's really about being an advocate for those that may not even see you, those that may not even know you're there advocating on behalf of them. And I think that's the difference. And be loud about it. Don't just do it I used to think that, look, as long as I take care of African Americans, my people, I would say, as long as I'm taking care of them in silence, they're fine. And I think it's more than that today. I think it's you have to be a stronger voice. And it's not saying you're only supporting African Americans. You're supporting the business. You're supporting equality, but you're especially supporting a community that you believe does not have those same opportunities, a community that is looked at as what are the mistakes they're going to make first versus, it's just a part of business and mistakes happen. And I think that's a big difference.
Anybody else want to tackle that question?
I would just jump in and say, I think Chris started with, it's always important to listen. Which I completely agree with, but it also is important to say something. And so somebody asked the question
of success for companies to be allies.
How can you, what can I do to be an advocate if I'm not in the senior leader position? It's say something and speak up. And I think starting that, if you're feeling like you should say something, but you're nervous or you're afraid you're going to say the wrong thing, like I have found that, yes, you may make mistakes, but it is always better to say something. And so that is always my advice to everyone. It is always better to say something than to stay quiet.
I love that comment. And it goes back to this idea of rooting out bias. Sometimes you can be the person in the room to say, wait a minute, are we thinking about that decision in the right way? Are we using the right data set? Did we cut it in the right way that we can ensure that we don't have any bias in our processes and systems? I think it's not taking for granted that we have done the right thing every day, everywhere, and looking for the places where there are still gaps and opportunities to drive equity. So I love your comment, Cara.
Next question. How can we do a better job, and this is to all panelists, impacting the educational opportunities to prepare candidates?
I'll take a stab at that one. I'm assuming for P&G, for example, we invest in universities, certain programs, even bringing students into the, call it, corporate environment at freshman and sophomore year to help them learn about, call it, corporate jobs, opportunities, functions, and what are some of those implications. And so investing along the way allows us also to stay connected with the professors along the way in the programs to make sure that students are coming out fully prepared for, call it, a long-term career with P&G. Some of you are familiar with our partnership with Inroads. That is a program that also, call it, stays connected with students over multiple years to kind of help invest in their development along the way. And in both cases, it really helps us to develop a really strong pipeline of, call it, interns who then transition to become full-time employees. I'm not sure if the question is speaking to, call it, university level education or even before that, but that's something that I know that we have been very committed to doing over multiple years.
Okay. Let's see, we've got time for maybe one more question. Cara, this is for you. What does REACH stand for?
It is our Racial Equity Action and Change Committee. And so it is, again, a separate sort of initiative, different than our D&I goals that we set in place 5 years ago, really focused on driving really a systemic change and betterment for Black Americans, period. And so it's really comprehensive. It's taking our team member goals around representation to the next level. From a guest standpoint, it's also taking that to say we want to actually create, make sure that all of our guests can see themselves when they walk into our stores and be overt for Black Americans and letting them feel welcome in our stores and the merchandise we carry. Within our communities, I talked a little bit about how we're building stores differently and what that looks like. And then also public policy, where Target is actually playing a more active role than we have in terms of our relationships that we have in communities and advocating for systemic change there as well.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all of you. This discussion will be available on We Empowering Women to Advance Wellness, forwe.org. Join us for future conversations with We, and check out our previous conversations with We at forwe.org. Consider joining our LinkedIn community. We connects our community to remarkable, successful women in the industry. We is accessible to everyone. Join us for our next discussion on October 27th. I would like to close with a quote from Shirley Chisholm, first Black woman elected to the United States Congress. And it reads, "If they don't give you a seat at the table, then bring a folding chair." Have a nice day, everyone, and thank you again for joining us.